The first time I saw the notice, I thought it was some kind of prank. A single sheet of paper, taped to my front door, stamped with the HOA logo like it was the United States Constitution, declaring in bold, all caps, new rule. No resident outside after 8 p.m. fines will apply. I stood there on my porch at 8:07 p.m., holding the letter, listening to the last cicadas fade into the night, and wondering if anyone in their right mind had actually agreed to this nonsense. The street was silent, not because people liked it, but because they were afraid. Behind their curtains, my neighbors peered out like inmates watching through cell bars. And then I saw her, Karen, the HOA president, waddling down the sidewalk in her floral housecoat, flashlight in hand, like some self-appointed prison warden. She stopped at each driveway, checking her clipboard, jotting down names. The sight of her smug little half-smile when she spotted a porch light on made my stomach twist. I wasn't about to let this pass. I'm a grown adult, not a teenager grounded by a parent. My property, my life, my time. Still, I stayed inside that first night, watching her make her rounds, clocking exactly where she lingered, noting how she seemed to spend more time near houses that had challenged her before. It wasn't about safety. It was about control. And that lit a fire in me. The next morning, I went to the HOA office, if you can call a converted pool maintenance shed an office, and asked for the meeting minutes that authorized this curfew. Karen was sitting there, leaning back in her chair like she was auditioning for the role of a mob boss in a low-budget TV show. She slid a stack of papers toward me without a word. I flipped through them, and sure enough, there was no vote, no quorum, no recorded discussion. Just her signature at the bottom of a president's emergency action form. I looked up and said, "This isn't legal, you know?" She smirked. "It's for everyone's safety. If you don't like it, move." That's when I knew exactly how I was going to break her. That night, at 8:45 p.m., I stepped out onto my porch in my running shoes, phone in hand, live streaming to my friends and a few local journalists I'd tipped off earlier. "Just out for a walk," I said into the camera, the HOA's curfew notice fluttering in the breeze behind me. I hadn't even reached the corner before Karen came power walking toward me, flashlight beams slicing through the darkness, her voice sharp and loud enough to wake every dog on the block. "You're in violation. I'm writing you up." But what she didn't see was the second person following a few feet behind her, Detective Ryan Moss from the county sheriff's office. He wasn't there as a favor. He was there because I'd filed a formal complaint that afternoon, citing unlawful detainment and harassment. The curfew, I'd learned, violated multiple county ordinances, not to mention state law on freedom of movement. Karen, in her frenzy, shoved the flashlight right in my face, blocking my path. "You're coming with me to the HOA office," she snapped. And that's when Ryan stepped in, badge catching the glow of the streetlight. "No, ma'am. You're not taking anyone anywhere. In fact, we need to have a talk about your so-called emergency actions." The confrontation drew neighbors out of their houses. Porch lights flipped on, blinds slid open. You could feel the tide turning as people realized they weren't powerless. Karen's voice went high and shrill, trying to talk over Ryan, claiming it was all for neighborhood safety, and that I was a troublemaker. But the more she spoke, the more ridiculous she sounded. Especially when Ryan asked her if she'd been personally enforcing the curfew every night. She said yes like it was a badge of honor. He smiled thinly. "Good. That makes it easier to document." The twist came when another voice joined the crowd. It was Edna, the HOA treasurer, who'd been silent for months. She stepped forward holding a manila envelope and said, "Karen, you told us this was temporary. You never said you were fining people without board approval." She handed the envelope to Ryan, and inside were copies of checks, fines paid by residents deposited directly into an account under Karen's name. The gasps from the neighbors were almost as loud as the crickets in the grass. Karen's face went pale, then red, then back to pale. She started to stammer something about reimbursement, but Ryan was already pulling out his notepad. I stood there, feeling the air shift around me. This wasn't just my fight anymore. This was everyone's. And I wasn't going back inside. Not now. Not ever. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no sound came out that didn't sound like an excuse. Neighbors were stepping out onto their lawns now, some holding phones, others crossing their arms with that look people get when they've been waiting for this moment for years. Ryan kept his voice even, but every word was a hammer blow. Ma'am, these curfews you've been enforcing aren't just unauthorized theory unlawful. And taking money under false pretenses? That's fraud. I suggest you think carefully before you say another word. The more she tried to defend herself, the more Edna cut her off with specifics. You fine the Millers for letting their dog out after 8:15. You fine the Garcias for unloading groceries. You fine me for watering my roses. None of this went through the board, Karen. You pocketed every dollar. She turned to the crowd. We've all been paying her to keep us prisoners in our own neighborhood. That was the crack in the dam. Voices started calling out, angry and raw. You fined my kid for riding his bike. You took my rent money for your so-called emergency fund. You told me I'd be evicted if I called the police. Karen tried to retreat, but she'd boxed herself in. Ryan stepped to block her path. You're not leaving until we get a statement, he said. And I swear I saw the moment the power drained out of her. It wasn't enough for me to see her cornered. I pulled out my phone and hit the stream's share button to blast it onto every local social media group I could. Within minutes, the comments started flooding in, people from other neighborhoods recognizing her from previous HOA jobs, some with their own horror stories. The image of Karen standing there, clutching her clipboard like it was a life raft, under the harsh glare of her own flashlight, spread like wildfire. Then came the second twist. From behind the crowd, a tall man in a county utilities jacket stepped forward. I've been trying to catch you for weeks, he said to Karen, his voice carrying a mix of relief and fury. We traced unauthorized electrical usage to this neighborhood, specifically your address. You've been powering your private security cameras off the HOA streetlight grid. That's theft of public resources. The crowd roared, some in disbelief, some in vindication. Karen actually took a step back like she'd been slapped. Ryan and the utility officer exchanged a look. Ma'am, at this point, you're facing multiple charges. You can come with us voluntarily, or he didn't finish the sentence. She dropped the clipboard. Her hands went up, but her chin stayed high, like she still believed she could talk her way out. They walked her to the patrol car slowly, the crowd parting just enough to make the path feel like a public gauntlet. People didn't yell obscenities. They didn't need to. The silence was louder, heavier, and it followed her all the way into the back seat, where the door shut with a final solid thunk. By the next morning, the HOA inbox was exploding. Residents demanded an emergency meeting to dissolve the board entirely. Edna agreed to serve as interim president only until new elections could be held, and one of her first actions was to abolish every emergency action Karen had ever filed. The curfew rule was gone before noon. I thought it would end there, but the story caught the attention of a local news anchor who'd been following my live stream. She called me that afternoon, wanting to run a segment on the HOA curfew scandal. By the time it aired, Karen's face, caught mid-yell in my video, was plastered across screens from here to the county line. The station had even dug into her history and found she'd pulled similar stunts in 3 other HOAs before quietly resigning under pressure. Within a week, Karen's house had a for sale sign out front. No one waved when she came back, escorted by 2 officers, to collect her belongings. No one offered to help. The woman who had strutted through our streets with a flashlight and a smirk now kept her head down, moving like she hoped the ground would swallow her whole. As for me, I didn't just win the right to walk after dark. I gained neighbors who understood that silence only helps people like Karen. On the first night after she was gone, a bunch of us met in the cul-de-sac at 9 p.m. sharp. We brought lawn chairs, lanterns, and coffee. We laughed, swapped stories, and watched the stars like we hadn't in years. Sometimes you have to break a rule to break the person who abuses it. And sometimes the simplest act, stepping outside when you're told not to, is the loudest way to say, "This is our home, and we're taking it back." What about you? If someone tried to ban you from leaving your own house after 8 p.m., would you stay quiet or step out into the night?